matter. The first, well, let me say first, we're not going to do the usual public comment because this is an abbreviated agenda tonight, but members of the public here who want to comment on the individual agenda items will have an opportunity to do that. Pete from Ledgewood is going to be here, but he went to the town office first, and so he's working his way over here. So I'm going to suggest that we skip to the update on the architect contract, which is brief because there isn't much of one. We can get that out of the way.
Well, the good news is we've settled most of any of the places we had questions. The bad news is the lawyers are still working on the language to make sure the language is correct. There was nothing really serious in there. It's just when you have two lawyers trying to deal with a contract, they've
Takes
got to have
longer
their
than it
all.
needs to.
So they've got to finalize that piece of language. The last email I saw, they were hopeful that they'd have that done by Wednesday. And then we have to send that up to our insurance carrier to MMA for them to plug in the insurance numbers.
Okay, and the board had voted at our last meeting to authorize the town manager and myself, the chair, to sign that contract when it becomes available. So the only reason I put it on the agenda tonight is I thought if we had it, we could make a public signing of it or whatever. We don't have it yet. But I've spoken with Steve. Steve is working and under the assumption that everything will be settled, and I'm quite sure it'll be settled too. So that's the update on that. So we'll hop back to the presentation from Ledgewood, now that you're in the right place.
Sorry about that.
Sorry we didn't make that more
It
clear.
happens all the time.
It does happen all the time.
It's lonely up there.
I got a text from Pete. I'm the only one here.
It's a bad sign.
Easy meeting. So Pete is here from Ledgewood. Pete presented to the working group with Steve and Will and Ben and the liaisons to the select board, which at that meeting were myself because Doug was out of town, and I guess Tom was sick for that one. I've substituted twice over the last couple of weeks. So anyway, Doug and I saw the presentation, and so now you have the other two members of the board here. So I will give the floor to you. Basically, and they have seen the documentation that we got as well. So if you could very briefly go through it, and then these guys may have a couple of questions on the process, and then we can move forward.
Basically, we're talking the difference between a construction manager and a general contractor. A construction manager gets involved in the project early on and works on the behalf of the owner, which in your case would be the town, to help manage pre-construction and construction. And when I talk about pre-construction, we support the design team with pricing and budgeting and scheduling so that throughout the process, we'll have an understanding of where we are budget-wise before we go out to bid. When we get to the final document stage, we as a construction manager will manage the bid process. We will bid out, we'll take the project and break it down into categories, into trades, so that we can say the site contractors, and we'll identify who should bid the job. We'll make recommendations to the town. We'll get feedback from the design team and come up with a list of qualified bidders to bid the job. And we'll do that for every trade. We'll put it out to bid. We'll receive the bids. We'll go through a post-bid interview process to make sure the apparent low one or two contractors have the appropriate understanding of the project as far as the schedule, the scope of work, what we anticipate them to do, to make sure that they have the manpower available to do the project within the time frame that we've laid out. Then once we've feel confident that the low bidders have the correct information, we'll compile all of that, present it to the group, and we'll develop what we call a GMP, which is a guaranteed maximum price based on the low bidders on every trade. And we'll develop our contract the final contract between ourselves and the town. It says we will manage the project throughout construction, and we'll keep it under this guaranteed maximum price, subject to change orders that the town may add or unforeseen conditions that may come up during construction. If there's ledge there that we didn't anticipate, that type of thing. But generally, we try to flush all of that out during the pre-construction so that we have a good understanding of what the budget is before we go out to bid. One of the that's one of the big differences between the CM approach and the general contracting approach. The general contracting approach is you wait to bid day, you put it out to bid to general contractors, then you wait and pray that you're gonna get it, come in on budget. Our approach, and it's not just our approach, the industry as construction managers, we manage the process and we give you milestones all the way through the design, through schematic, design development, and the final GMP, where we anticipate the project coming in budget-wise, so that there isn't that big shock. And it also gives you an opportunity that during the design process, if we say, wait a minute, throw up the flag and say, we're over budget, we have an opportunity to work with the design team to modify some items, to bring it back in cost before we put it out to bid. It's a much more efficient way. That way you're getting competitive prices on the scope that we anticipate building. As a general contracting option, you put it out to bid and you come in over budget, your only recourse is either redesign and go out to rebid or negotiate with a low bidder to try to do value engineering, to try to cut stuff out. At that point, you're gonna get 50 cents on a dollar. You know, our approach, the CM approach, is you make the changes before you put it out to bid. So you don't have to deal with that negotiations and trying to get your best credits. So it's an approach that I feel, I've personally been in the business for over 40 years, and I feel it's the best delivery method out there. We do 90 to 95% of our work, Ledgewood Construction, as construction managers, and we promote the delivery method. We still do some competitive bid work. Kind of helps us keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry, what's happening over globally, as far as in our industry, and to make sure that we stay competitive. Any questions?
I guess my question would be for Rick, with regards to the town's bidding policy and percentage preferential for residents. Does that play in to the bid process for the town?
Professional services are excluded from the bidding requirements.
I mean, if a resident currently bids, don't they get a,
Oh, you mean for the actual bidders?
if anybody that's a
Yeah.
resident, and they're a little bit over what the low one is,
Right, there is,
there's a percentage that they're
One of the,
allowed.
excuse me, let me interject. There is, that's one of the big advantages, another big advantage with the construction management approaches is the fact that you see everything we do, open book, so you'll know all the bidders that we go out to. And matter of fact, we'll encourage the town and the designers to give us recommendations and who else, if we don't have them on a list, who else performs well in the area. It enables you to get local people more opportunity to bid the job. If you go out to a general contractor, it's gonna be a general one number, and you have no idea who he's carried, and he could be carrying everybody from away.
And I know most of the guys involved will know who the
Right.
local ones are, and I just want to make sure that they're given some form of opportunity
And-
through our process.
And the other opportunity, the other possibility is, you don't necessarily have to use the low bidder on every trade. You can look at it and say, we like the second bidder, he's performed really well for us, he's a local firm, we're willing to pay the extra
Understood,
1% or 2%. You have the power to do that.
Yep,
Right.
thank you.
Owen, anything?
And so I'll follow up to that with one of my questions, which was about the low bidder, but you kind of answered it, which is we don't always necessarily have to go with the low bidder. One, if we find a more applicable person locally, or two, if they come in at the low bid and you do your evaluation, find out, hey, I don't actually think they can fulfill on this bid that they've given us.
Right, I mean, part of our post-bid interview is to try to flush out to make sure, we don't want to sign a contractor up that's made a mistake, because then it's just a battle all the way through the job, and it's not a good working environment. We want to have a team that feels confident in what they bid on and understands the project and is willing to move forward. So that's part of our process to make sure that doesn't happen. But also during our post-bid interviews, we're gonna get a feel for, it's a face-to-face, and we're gonna get a feel for, do they really have a grasp on this project? And we may come to you and say, even though this guy is the low bidder, we don't recommend using him for these reasons, and we would recommend the second bidder. That happens very rarely, but it does happen.
I mean, ultimately, as Pete explained it to us the other day, the choice of of all the subcontractors is ultimately ours, the towns. They're not going to select them. They're going to make recommendations, and we're paying them for their expertise and their experience in working with these folks for a long period of time. So, you know, the scenario that I would envision is, you know, they may come back with a list of electrical contractors, let's just say, to pick one out of the hat, and they say, here's the low bidder, we've worked well with them, whatever, and then we can come back and say, you know what, we worked with that contractor a couple of years ago, and we had an issue with them, we need to go to somebody else, and that's our choice.
And what I'm gonna try to do is avoid that step, is actually, before we go out to bid, I'm gonna give you a list of recommended subs that we're gonna go to bid with, and then get your feedback. If at that point, before you even bid the job, if you feel there's a problem with a particular sub, we'll take them off the list.
I think that would be a lot easier than coming back.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
The electrical one
yeah.
time, the plumbing next time, and somebody else.
Oh, no, we would do all the trades would bid at the same time.
Yeah.
And then we'd do the post-bid interviews, and then we'd come to you with a complete master list of,
The post-bid interview piece, I think, is really important, because, I mean, we've seen that in sewer bids in the past, where we get a bid that's way lower than the other, and then you look down into the details of it, which I'm not that good at, and you realize, oh, this guy only
They don't
budgeted for
understand.
half the pipe that we need. That's why his bid was lower. And so these guys take care of that for us.
And I think I've had conversations with some of the folks, or at least this guy at the table, where I've like tried to lay this. Tell me these two bids. Why is this person charging $5 per linear foot of pipe and this person 10? But then you go down a couple of lines and you realize they crossed, and all of a sudden this person's the high person and that person's the low person. So it kind of balances out in the end. But it becomes confusing when you try to look at it line by line and what they actually spec out for.
Well, and some contractors will build in their labor costs to a material somewhere along the line too, and so we don't know what their profit margin is on the material, and so that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that you guys have enough experience with all your subs that you've used over the years that you know what they're going to do.
right, and I think we talked in our first meeting, when we go through the pre-construction and we're doing budgeting, we will go out to subcontractors and get their assistance in budgeting with no commitments. Basically, the only commitment we make is you help us with a budget, you're gonna have an opportunity to bid the job. And, over the years, we've found contractors that are very good at budgeting and contractors that are not so good at budgeting. But they could be both excellent in doing the work.
Yeah.
But they just don't understand the budgeting and the conceptual filling in the blanks, that type of thing. So we tend to go to the subcontractors that we feel have a really good track record of budgeting, so that we're not, you know, out in left field someplace. But that's not to exclude the guys that does a really good job in the field, but needs everything spelled out for him before he can price it. So,
Another question.
Yep, absolutely. That's what we're here for.
And before I do this question, I'll do a quick preamble, which is, so I'm the trades guy that is horrible at budgeting and just always asks for time and materials, because I figure I'll save you money that way. I can do the work. I can do it just fine. Don't make me bid on something. Don't ask for a quote. So on that, I loved when I was reading through this that, you know, so there's the pre-construction, and then there's the kind of ramp up, grab everyone, bring all the subs onto the same page, and then they all start pouring crete and pounding nails, and you all are there daily inspecting
yeah,
things.
we are actually, at that point, we are actually acting as the contractor. So we will have a full-time superintendent on the job, we'll have a project manager working on the project that handles all the contracts and paperwork and all that type of thing, and we have boots on the ground every day inspecting. One of our mottos is, we don't expect, we inspect. So everything that is specified and designed, we make sure you're getting exactly what you're paid for. And that's our superintendent's responsibility. Manages the entire schedule with the subcontractors. We do weekly meetings with subcontractors. All the foremen on site are required to come to the meetings, and we lay out 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. This, what we call our look-ahead schedule, and says, okay, next week, this is our goal, this is where we're headed, the following week, this is where we're headed. So everybody understands what direction the project is going in, and it makes for a much smoother operation.
So the second part of my question was, when I was reading through, it seems like the bulk of what you do is not, or your organization is not pounding the nails. It's making sure that the folks pound the right
we
nails
are-
in the right spots.
Good point. We are managers, we do not self-perform any work.
So the question is, and you don't have to go into detail or in depth, but the folks that you have coming out, are these typically folks that have worked in the trades, do know the difference between, and it's a silly example, but you know, the 2x6, the 2x8.
You know, our person in the field,
Are they
Our
former
superintendent,
trades folks that know how to build something versus folks that just, because I've gotten in trouble with folks that, and they're great, that they go to college to learn how other people build stuff, but then when you go and they're trying to look at it, sometimes a builder looks at things different than a person who is just kind of an architect, sorry. But you know, I'm just trying to get a sense of the folks that are inspecting the actual workers. Are these typically prior trades folks that have their backs go out on them, I can relate, and then they're transitioning to more of the inspections?
we have superintendents in our company, I think the shortest experience is 25 years. 25 to 35 years of the years of experience that our superintendents, and not, you know, a lot of them come up through the trades that have swung the hammer, that type of thing. You know, they come with different backgrounds. We have a superintendent that has a civil background, that was a surveyor, that was a field engineer, and, you know, he's worked his way up through. So we have very qualified superintendents. I wouldn't be sitting here, and I wouldn't have the reputation that we have if we wasn't for the people that we have. We pride ourselves on our staff, and I put them up against any superintendent out there.
And then my last question is, I'm tickled about the kind of guaranteed no more than price. I forget the terminology you used.
Guaranteed maximum price.
I think that's great, and we'll cross that bridge when, you know, in the post-bond world and making sure that we come in on budget and everything. So, but the question is, in the pre-bond world,
Pre-construction world?
no, the pre-bond world.
Okay.
So we will have to present to the townsfolk a request for a certain amount of money.
Right.
And we need to be able to back that up with specs on our end. Everything that I've heard is that we'll, utilizing your construction management services, we'll get better numbers to plug into that, give the citizenry a really good picture of what it is that they're buying with this bond. So could you just speak a little bit to, I'm sure you've observed other municipal projects where there hasn't been a construction manager coming early in the process to get those better numbers. How does that change the presentation to the town with these better numbers backing up, you know, what the actual cost is going to be, and a better sketched out of what the project is versus the way that we've kind of typically been doing it, which is more basic building blocks, not kind of refined, detailed pictures?
Yeah, I think the best example I can give you is 2 years ago, we got involved in an addition and renovation to the Biddeford High School. Before it went to bond, before it went to referendum, Harriman's was the architect, excellent A&E firm that have done tremendous amount of schoolwork. They put a target budget on, they were thinking that would have to go to referendum at $33 million. During the pre-construction, we worked with the designers, they gave us some preliminary drawings, we put together a budget, and we went back to the town and said, you know, we really think the construction portion of this project is only worth $27 million. And they were able to go to referendum under the $30 million mark, which was a big psychological boost for that vote. And the project happened. It was a tremendous success. We had 9 different phases in the project, and we had 1,200 students in our construction site every day. And you could have never done that with a bid job. Because the CM gets involved early. We helped develop the phases, worked with the designers and said, okay, because we had to play the shell game. So we had to keep moving students around, said, okay, we're going to renovate this wing during these periods. We tied it all into the school calendars, so we made switches from one phase to another between, you know, at Christmas break and at spring break and at, you know, winter break, summer break. You know, summer we had summer blitzes. We had to completely revamp the HVAC system, brand new boilers. All of that had to happen over a summer so they wouldn't miss a school day. And like I said, I don't think you could have done that with the general contracting bid process. And the big advantage was to the town was they went to referendum with that psychological number that was under the $30 million that helped make that project pass. Now, obviously, your job is much smaller than that, but we're still gonna put the same type of focus in. We're gonna work with the design team. They're gonna give us some schematic drawings, so that, an understanding of mechanical systems, structural systems, architectural, an outline spec, so I can understand what Steve is thinking about in his brain as far as what he envisions this project at, so we can try to refine, instead of having, just taking the square footage of the building times a certain unit price and saying historically it's come in at that, this is what it's gonna cost, we can break it down by trade and come up with a budget. We think we might be a tighter budget for you, a better understanding of what the budget's gonna be before you go to referendum.
And that's, as it was explained to me, one of the big advantages of using the construction manager method is that we have a much better idea of the budget before we go to the vote. Now, he's not going to bid his subs before we go to the vote, but they have enough experience doing the estimating that they're going to be able to give us a pretty good number so that we don't get surprised by a bid that's higher after the vote. One of the issues that we have with this particular project is, if we have our vote in June and if the vote passes, we won't be starting construction for a while because we've got to raise some private money. So there is going to have to be that'll be probably a greater contingency than the bid is the time aspect of it, because, if we don't start for a year, then there could be some inflation to the costs there as well. We'll have to figure that in.
And another example is we are currently working with the Falmouth Library Group. We did a budget for them 2.5 years ago, and they have been this long raising money to get this project to go, and we've just finally went from schematics to design development. Now they have the challenge of how do they make up the cost of those 2.5 years of inflation. So it's not unusual for us to work with an owner to wait for them to get through fundraising. We will try to do our best during the referendum budget to project, but nobody has a crystal ball, so it's going to be, we're going to do our best guess as, okay, this is where we think the construction cost is going to be. If you start in 6 months, it's going to be this. If you start in a year, it's going to be that. And, and try to give you some idea of, where the number might come in a year from now.
Any more questions about the process or anything like that?
Just the payment scheme, it seemed like if you save us money, you don't make more money. How do you remain profitable? It's awesome from our perspective.
Right, and, and the fact that we're not the only construction managers out there doing this type of work. And if you read the AIA contract, it actually has it in the contract, has a clause written right in there that there's a clause for shared savings, so that once we set the GMP, any dollar saved under that, we can agree on what the split of that savings is gonna be. Our philosophy is, I wanna negotiate a project with a fair fee right up front, and 100% of the savings is gonna go back to our client. And the reason I do that is, if I was sitting on the other side of the table, the first question I would have that come to my mind is, how do I know they're not inflating the budget to get a windfall at the end of the job? So if I take that that question right off the table, it makes me more competitive. And so, that's been our company philosophy. Now, on the other hand, we're doing a project for the town of Cumberland right now, their fire station. And the town manager, after we won the job and got into our first project meeting, the town manager said, look, I understand, I respect your position, but I really want to share in the savings. And they said, we wanted to write the contract so that you would get 25% of the savings, the town would get 75% of the savings. He thought that incentive was going to incentive us more to save money. But, we really appreciate it, and I'm not going to say no. But it's not our philosophy. I mean, we want to negotiate a fair fee up front, and then we're going to work hard to get you the best quality project that we can.
Okay. I would add that at our meeting last week, Ben, as a library director, was present, and Ann was there representing the library committee. I would invite either of them to make any comment that you feel you would like to at this point.
A lot of this has been Greek to me. But the contract, the construction manager philosophy, the idea behind it sounds really good. It sounds like it eliminates surprises, which I think is what we want.
Not recounting all of the questions that you asked at the other meeting, but did you ask any questions that we haven't asked in this meeting, and were there really interesting responses?
No, I think Pete actually gave a really concise recap of what he did at the last meeting. I mean, there were things that I was thinking that he brought up later to answer your questions. So, I mean, I think we talked longer about different things. I mean, some different projects that they'd done, but I think that covers all the key topics.
Yeah, I think we did talk longer, and I think a lot of it was some of us around the table at that meeting just getting more comfortable with the process and understanding it. And so I feel like I have a pretty good understanding coming in tonight. You guys didn't have the advantage of being at that meeting, so it's really questions for you guys. But and a lot of it, quite honestly, for me was becoming comfortable with Pete, which I did. I mean, at the presentation I thought was very good, very thorough. Any question we had, he answered. He was able to, just as he did tonight, was able to give us examples, so I was comfortable with that.
Well, in fact, since that meeting, while we're not contracting with Pete yet at this point, I believe he's been helpful in the whole process of asking some questions now that make the team try to answer those questions now rather than waiting until 3 or 4 weeks from now and get to those questions, and you have to kind of backtrack a bunch.
Right.
So Pete has already been helpful to the process already, even though he's not contracted with us yet.
So I would ask the rest of the board at this point, I mean, I've had this agenda item separated into two things, which is to hear the presentation of the proposal and questions connected with that, and then actually to consider engaging them. So if there are any more questions about the process, I would entertain those now, and if not, then we could go into whether we want to engage them, this firm or not.
I don't have any more process questions.
Okay. And on considering engaging them, and it is a little different of a process for the public to understand, and that's, as we stated at the outset, typically with a municipal project like this, always in the past, we would have the design team, we would get the designs, we would vote the referendum, and then we would put the whole project out to bid to a general contractor and hope that we get a good answer on that. We're sort of supplanting that process now, and so we as a board have to decide if we're comfortable with the process, if we want to go with that. And then the other issue we have to do is we could, if we decided to, we could decide to put out an RFP for construction manager services and get a bunch of bids back and go that route. The downside of doing that is if we did that at this point, we'd probably be looking at a 6-week delay, which might very well not allow us to get to the June ballot with the good estimates that we really want. As Rick said, our purchasing policy does not require us to go out to bid for professional services like this. And Pete and Ledgewood come very highly recommended from Will, who's worked with them on many jobs. And I think for those of us around the table the other day, that I was very impressed, and Ben is nodding his head, and Ann is nodding her head. So I would just ask you guys if you're comfortable, because if you're comfortable with it, then we can engage them tonight, and we're committing to the pre-construction fee, which I think is it $4,000 or $5,000? $5,000.
I'm ready to engage if you want to.
But then we are committing that if the vote is successful, that they will carry on as acting as our general contractor. However, we still have control over the bids. In other words, all the sub-bids will come in, and we'll have some control over that. And I think that, from my opinion, I think that the process will serve us very, very well. So I would open that up to you guys. And
I'm sure there's good communications between these two guys, these 3 guys, 4 guys. Then, I don't think we'll be in a bad spot by letting them make a lot of the decisions and presenting us with the options.
yeah.
And we have no obligation if, I don't even want to say that, because the bond is going to pass. So the bond is going to pass. If we have all the information, if we have good numbers, we move forward the right way, the bond will pass. But in the event that it didn't, I don't want to say that too loudly, we're not obligated to anything else.
And I think I asked this last time. I know it's only 5,000, but you're confident you can find that money
Well,
somewhere?
we have money in that, the library has given us $80,000 to.
Okay,
for
so
the-
we can dip into that.
Yep,
And we can also dip into that to keep Steve going as well,
for the,
pre-bond
Yeah.
money? Okay.
I think we're okay.
Then I move
And I'll second.
to approve Ledgewood Construction as our library's project construction manager and task Rick, the town manager, with executing a contract with them to provide the services.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? I would add, as far as the contract goes, that we've
You get me that AIA.
it will be an AIA and, what is it,
Contract.
American Institute of Architects, I think?
yeah,
It'll be a
right.
contract that follows those guidelines, much as Steve's will, so.
We're liable to have the same exact questions.
No, we're liable to have that all cleared up hopefully
Right,
soon.
yeah.
So yours is seamless.
Yeah, but at any rate, that'll be the contract, and by the motion, we're authorizing Rick to sign that contract.
Do you want to put eyes on it prior to that
That's,
signature?
that's up to you guys.
I just always like a second set of eyes, especially his. Nothing against you, Rick, at all. It's just, it seems
If you want to do that, that's fine.
expect but inspect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Then I would maybe amend my motion to have the contract to be executed with both the town manager and the chair of the board's approval.
You okay with that for your second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? I will remind you that we are a board of three tonight, but by charter, all three of us do have to vote in favor of a motion for it to pass. A 2-to-1 vote does not pass. So, all in favor of the motion? Okay, that is a passed motion. Thank you very much, Pete, for coming up. Sorry for the mix-up. You're welcome to stay for some other
Thank you very
scintillating
much for-
discussion, but
Get some bad weather to travel
Safe
back.
travels, yeah.
And luckily, it's all live streamed at Rockport, and you can watch it all later at your
Right.
leisure.
We want to see that number go up from Doug to 2.
How many people do we have, Jeff?
Perfect.
okay. The next item on our agenda, we had the update on the architect contract already. Update on the Northeast Mobile Health Ambulance contract. I put this on the agenda tonight just because there will be another meeting of the Ambulance Review Committee meeting before our next regular Select Board meeting, so I thought we should talk a little bit about what went on at the last meeting. Mark and I were there. Doug was away for that meeting, so I sat in for him. And basically, I mean, there's no way around it if we stay with Northeast, which, even if we don't stay with Northeast, we're going to be looking at a fairly significant increase for providing our ambulance service, and that's mostly driven by the reduction in call volume from what they had anticipated and the decline over the last several years. To sum up the meeting, and Mark, feel free to chime in because you were there also. They presented 4 options. There was some discussion among the committee, which includes representatives from all 4 towns. Some towns wanted to continue the service at the current level, which is the highest level of all the options that we were presented with. Others wanted to look at a somewhat reduced level of service as suggested by the Northeast folks because they feel that they can still provide what we need at a lower level of staffing and ambulances and things of that nature. So there's a little bit of a difference opinion among the committee with that. The other big issue that came up during our meeting, you saw it in Rick's notes, was we discovered that they are providing service to the islands. In other words, when the islands have a medical emergency and they fly somebody over, it's Northeast, it's going down to the Owl's Head Airport to meet that plane and then transport the patient at that point. And they're doing quite a bit of that to the point that the committee felt that we probably ought to be in contact with the island towns to see if they can help participate in this contract where we basically we're paying for the service and they're using the service. So we wanted them to participate as well.
And I did some follow-up because there was a conversation at the meeting and reached out to Andrew Dorr, who was the town manager in Vinyl Haven, and also with Butch from Northeast. And it's all from, all the calls that we saw on that list are all from Vinyl Haven. they're all Vinyl Haven calls. We have a meeting tomorrow morning with Andrew Dorr, who's the town manager from Vinyl Haven, who's on the mainland tonight. And the four managers and Andrew will meet tomorrow to talk about how this might work out.
Okay, good. Mark, did you want to add anything? You were at the
I was
meeting.
just thinking in the numbers you were talking about, I mean, Vinyl Haven had 79 calls, I think,
Yeah.
which is 19 more than Hope.
Right.
And they're not paying, Vinyl Haven's not paying anything, and it's 36 less than Lincolnville. So they're getting a good deal. And when you look at the other towns that are there, I think their totals usage is around 70 to 75, and that includes the 38 from Rockland. So a lot of people are getting a lot of good use on the backs of us, I think, in some respect.
Right.
So,
The difference with the other, we had a list of calls to other towns other than the four towns, and the difference between the Vinyl Haven ones and the others is the others are all provided as mutual aid, meaning that there's an expectation that if we are ever in a bind, for example, the Rockland will come up here and help us if our trucks are busy, or Union could come over and help in Hope or Appleton if we can't get a truck out there. So there's that back and forth. Those are a little different. Vinyl Haven can't help us at all. They can't send an ambulance over to help us if we are stressed or anything like that. So, and I'm hopeful that they'll want to participate. And I do think, my opinion is that,
I'm not sure want to participate is.
well,
is
but if they want to provide that service for their residents,
One of the things I discovered in talking to Andrew is that basically what happens is that if you go to the clinic out there and there's a physician's assistant there and you need to go to the hospital, then they have to, if the ferry isn't running, then they have to fly you over. And every time they fly you over, then they need an ambulance at the other end to get you to the hospital.
Right.
And that's, you know.
They fly over on a plane or they take Life Flight? Because Life Flight will
Life
drop
Fl-
you right at the hospital.
No, they
Life Flight-
fly over on
it's,
Penn Bay.
I think it's Penobscot Air Service or
Penobscot
something
Air.
like that.
and the severity of it, too.
Yeah, I mean, a life
Because
flight
I
could be
know-
called if it was
yeah,
really
Life Flight
serious.
does
but-
have a plane.
Right, but I
they
believe
typically
they
don't.
come over on Penn Bay Air.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they fly into Owl's Head.
That makes
and-
sense.
And then they've got to get transported to the hospital.
And the ambulances that are contracted for us have been doing 100% of those, I think, or very
Yes,
nearly
yeah.
so for the last year or so.
76 out of 79, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and the
Those
difference.
moneymakers for them, though?
Yep.
Well, but it doesn't cover the whole, I mean, just like when the ambulance rolls for us, the money that they get for insurance does not cover the whole cost of the service because of our call volume is not high enough.
And one of the arguments that they make, Northeast is making, is that often those transports from the airport to the hospital don't require a paramedic. And my guess is even some of them, Andrew may find it would be cheaper for the people to just get a taxi to meet him at the airport and take.
Uber.
Yeah. I mean, if it's not that kind of an emergency, if you
Driving
just have to go to
goes
the,
insane.
you just have to get to the emergency room, it may be that,
Yeah, all it
you know,
takes is one of those to go bad, though. And
no, but I mean, if you go to your typically, if you go to your doctor's office and your doctor says, you need to get to the hospital, you know, 9 times out of 10, you're probably driving yourself or a relative's driving you to the hospital. In this case, every time, it's somebody has to pick the person up at the airport, or 76 out of the 79 times, somebody has to get them to the airport, and they're using the ambulance to do that.
Well, it's my thought that if we could bring Vinyl Haven into the mix, then it makes a lot more sense to me to stay with the current level of service that we have, because that would be an additional.
You know, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think the current level, with some fine tuning that Butch had talked about, to ensure that we keep those levels, I think would be.
And so that's what I would just like to hear from this board is what, you know, how does the board want to proceed with this? What recommendations does the board want to make as far as where we go? And we did today get another proposal. What was it, the 2.5 or something like that?
Yeah, and my email is locked up, so I can't get that
Did I
out.
miss that?
Came in an email today.
Just, it came late.
This was
today.
As
Oh,
a-
this
as
is
a result of
another,
the,
it's
Yeah.
an option
2.5.
2.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an option that we had asked for to say, well, if we can keep the same number of trucks and then reduce it a little bit on the weekends or
Our
something.
Camden counterpart asked for that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think we did.
Yeah.
The number.
The committee asked.
Right.
Yeah.
The new number, if you back up to that last slide, Jeff, or go forward to the, I don't know which direction.
And he blacked out.
Anyway, the anticipated subsidy for the new option total subsidy would be
Gone.
294,000 as opposed to
there.
315,000 if we keep the service as it is now. So it saves us a little bit of money without the cuts as deep as some of the other towns we're concerned about, mostly Camden.
Excuse me.
So that's, what does your number say on that one?
294.
294, so it would bring the subsidy up from option two to option one. So it was 1.5 you were talking about, not
Yes.
2.5, 1.5.
Right.
So in between option one and option two, and it brings it up to, it brings it up to.
294 is the
294.
total, and the net loss instead of 175 is 215. But the staffing
Staffing.
levels were, it says remains at 860 hours as opposed to the 812 there. 2 paramedic ambulances every day, 7 days a week, daytime. 1 advanced ambulance every day, 7 days a week, and then 2 paramedic ambulances every night, 7 days a week. So the difference is, instead of having 3 paramedic ambulances weekday, daytime, you'd have 2, and you'd have 1 advanced without a medic. And to me, Northeast has made it a good argument that they don't need a paramedic on every truck. The number of calls doesn't support it. The argument on the other side that we're hearing on the committee is, well, what if the truck is the one that gets to you where you actually need the paramedic? And, you know, that's an argument, but you can carry that to an extreme, in my opinion. So,
Let me do my rant.
Please.
So here's my rant. I'll try to make it brief. I did not follow this much and have been trying to play catch up over the last couple of weeks in anticipation of renewing their contract or not. And so I've talked with folks in the Rockport fire and rescue world, in the Camden first aid fire rescue world, and folks on the county end. And I've been consistently hearing the same thing, which is Northeast is not able to fulfill. So let alone the different conversations about option 1, option 2, option 3, they can't do what it is that we've contracted them to do as it stands right now. And so I have a concern about moving forward with Northeast in any contractual form if the history has been an inability to fulfill what we have under current contractual obligations. So one of the anecdotes that I heard recently, again, it's an anecdote, but it's one that I've actually heard quite a few times, that there was an emergency in Lincolnville and that a ambulance was called for. Northeast said that they could not fulfill that. And so an ambulance from Rockland started rolling from Rockland all the way up to Lincolnville. And shortly after that ambulance from Rockland left, a Northeast ambulance said that they were doing a long haul transport. So what one was speculating was that instead of responding to our contractual emergency in Lincolnville, they held that truck and waited to do a transport, which makes more money, and relied on Rockland to respond to our services or for mutual aid, and then we reimburse them later. That's an example of something that I've heard from a lot of different folks, all in the same space, but it's not all the same people in the same shop. It's a lot of different shops that I've been going around to. I've kind of actively been seeking out information on this because like I said, I'm playing catch up.
It's, some of those, you know, that happened, I think about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And I did the investigation on that and did a lot of work on that. And there's parts of that that are true, that are factual. And one of the things that came as a result of that work that we did, I think you were on the ambulance review committee still at the time, was they went to IM responding as a method of tracking where the ambulances are. They
So there's a little beacon on the actual
no they when they
itself.
when they call in, you know this better.
I'll let you go, and then
Yeah, and then
I don't know
and
where
then
you're
you'll-
going, but-
you're right, but what they were doing was they were asking dispatch, county dispatch, to call Northeast Ambulance down in Brunswick to find out if there was an ambulance available. That wasn't working. What ended up happening was they went to the same system as the fire department, and I believe maybe police doesn't use I am responding, but fire department, they have an automatic, when they respond, it goes up on a board at dispatch as I am responding, and it tracks, not physically by GPS, but it says, this ambulance is off at a call here, this ambulance is off at a call here, this ambulance is off at a call here. The timing you have for some of those, that the facts are a little off because they didn't make a choice. There was no call in Lincolnville when the call went to transport down
My
there.
example was a week ago.
Oh, no, that's not one that I,
My example was a week ago.
yeah.
And that's the more recent one, and I've heard, as you've heard, I'm sure, examples over the course of this
Right.
3-year contract. And again, my concern is that even though these concerns have been raised, it's apparently not getting mitigated. And there's an over-reliance on Rockland to the tune of 60-something calls that Rockland's had to respond to.
Well,
just
maybe
in the
clear
last-
about that too. When those calls come to Rockland, Northeast pays for them. Northeast is charged for those calls. They pay Rockland.
What does
We
that
don't.
mean to Rockland, though?
Rockland makes $800 a call.
That's why they raise their rates.
It actually hurts Northeast to
Yeah, so.
have them call for mutual aid because they're paying Rockland, plus they lose the income from the call.
There was a lot of conversation, I think Butch was caught off guard, the meeting up in Lincolnville where he learned, I think for the first time, perhaps, that the procedures in place, such as always having an ambulance here for us, ready to go, wasn't being followed. So there was some miscommunications because some of the people there that works for Northeast, mentioned that nobody up there knew that they had to have one there ready. So they would just take a transport when it came. I think that was a bit of a surprise, and I think he was going to correct that problem.
I hope, because this isn't making pizzas. You can burn a pizza in an oven and you make another pizza. This is public safety. And I mean, for them to be operating at the tail end of a 3-year contract and to have the guy driving the helm just now learn the fact that he's not having ambulances where he's supposed to be having ambulances strikes me as unprofessional. Or there's deficiencies.
Well,
Maybe I'll say that.
I think, Ken touched on it. I mean, we could go out to bid, and we're not going to find anyone that's going to be anywhere near as reasonably priced. And secondly, we're not obligated to have one, but we have morally, so do we want to continue at the current rate?
Well, and I think the other thing that the committee talked about too was entering into a 1-year contract at this
With an
point
option
with an option to go on, and that will give, because right now, if we decided tonight, you know what, we don't want to continue with them, we don't have time to get something in place for July 1. So I think that with the support of this board, if that's what this board would like to do, is to go into a 1-year contract with them with an option for, a second or third
I
year
think
or something like that.
it's fairer for both of us, I think, because, if their transfer calls go up, they're gonna be, they're gonna be making a fair amount of money. If they go down, then, I understand that too. But I mean, we don't wanna get locked into a 3-year deal where one or the other of us takes a,
It's worked out in our favor with the 3-year deal.
Right.
Because they've not raised their rates. But if it was a 1-year deal, they would have said, well, we're not making the calls, we've got to go up each year, so each of the.
And they provided statistics to us to say, had the call volume stayed constant from the first year they started with us, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
and there might be in the language in the contract,
So
some
has the
tipping
call
points.
volume gone down 400%? Because the price has gone up 400%.
The call volume has gone down 400 calls, I think, and
yeah.
it's
Out of
$560 a call, I think.
Yeah, but the percentages just don't match up. For the decline in call volume, for the increase, they're two different curves. I mean, because you do the math on that on the current option, the 315,000 over the current subsidy of 79,000. That's like close to a 400% increase, and there hasn't been a 400% decline. in
No, but
transports and
you can't figure it
emergencies.
out by percentages. You have
I
to
know,
look at,
I know.
You have to look at the.
More complicated math than that, but the general, I mean, 400 calls.
400
over-
calls at $565, was that the number, Mark?
I think so, yeah. And I think I asked him, I said, well, what's the reasoning for the drastic drop in calls? I said,
We've been looking at that for a year.
and I don't think there was an answer to it. I mean, nobody really knows why.
Yeah.
So here's my last bit of rant. I love the 1 year. That's my recommendation is a 1 year contract for sure. From a lot of these conversations that I've had, it keeps kind of coming back to that dirt road, paved road analogy. It takes more to maintain a dirt road, but then when you do a paved road, then you bring your maintenance costs down. But there's the upfront capital of changing a dirt road to a paved road. And that's the analogy, for me anyway, for a municipally owned and operated emergency response system.
Your paved road in that case would be about $1.2 million.
Well, I'm hearing different numbers than that, and what I've told the folks that I've been talking with is what you have to do is you have to come to us with verifiable numbers that make sense. So you can't come with a pie in the sky, we're going to buy a used ambulance for $25K and then put $50K as stuff in it, and then hopefully the ambulance doesn't break down because it's a used ambulance.
Right.
You do have to come with the $200,000+ ambulance, and then you got to put the stuff in it so it's still under warranty. I understand that you're talking a good upfront cost, but I don't know if
And that's
it.
just one ambulance. 4 towns, you gotta have more than that.
Yeah.
So you're still looking at $1.2 million if you wanna have it adequately staffed
Easy.
as we are now.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I am curious about, if we've jumped up roughly less than 400%, but roughly 400%, what can we anticipate for increases going forward with them? Because I think that those should be built into at least our brains anyway, as far as, you know,
It all depends on the call volume. That's what it comes down to. That's what we were told 5 years ago when we first started this ambulance review committee. It all depends on the call volume. That's what sustains it. And the problem with it is when you have a low, if you look at the statistics and you can say, well, a community of so many people requires so many calls or whatever, and you could put that number in. But the problem with a small community is you can't have a half an ambulance. So your costs are going to be higher per capita than they would be for a larger community because you've
And if you
just the way the numbers work
If you
out.
think back to when Camden First Aid was there, when a number was presented for just a whisker over 400,000, I mean, it's not terribly different if we just stayed that route then or now. I mean, the 24,000 figure came up with Northeast, I think, and it was attractive, much less than the 400,000 or so that was.
And they were asked
I
a
don't
lot
blame
of
you for
questions
having
about
that be attractive.
They were
That
asked a lot of
totally
questions
sounds
about that
attractive.
because they said, "How can this be?" And they explained it to us, and they some of that is still relevant now. Is that they do make money on their transports, and so that does help to subsidize our service.
Well, and that's another thing that I do, and I don't know, I haven't wrapped my brain around this. When I look at this stuff, I block out transfers. Because transfers are between Northeast and the hospital. It's not them coming to rescue me when I bump my head.
No, but it allows them to maintain the capital equipment here.
Totally understand that. But
keeps
as
the
it
cost
relates to
down.
the dirt road, tarred road, municipally owned, I'm only looking at emergencies. I'm not looking at transfers. Northeast can keep transfers. That's their moneymaker. The hospital will be happy. That's fine. But as it relates to our municipal emergency responses to the citizenries that get in a car accident or slip and fall on the ice, we're not talking about combining these two numbers, emergency and transfer. We would only be funding the emergency component of it.
Right, but if you ask somebody to come in and just do that, your cost is going to be a lot higher per call, probably more than twice.
And I'll tell you another thing that's concerning me. I am totally on my soapbox. When we had a handful of months back this string of ambulance drivers going off the road because of lack of sleep, I started asking. I was randomly seeing paramedics and folks at the gas station filling up the ambulance, and I started asking questions, and I am very concerned about the underpaid and the overworked aspect to these private corporations and these emergency services. When it's municipally owned and operated, there's a lot more. None of this tells me how much sleep and pay the person who's supposed to come and save my life and possibly do a tracheotomy on the side of the road, I would really like that person to be able to spend time with their kids and get a good night's sleep. I'm hearing consistently that these folks have to work 2 jobs. They're severely underpaid. They're high-performing folks, and yet they aren't getting any sort of sleep, and there aren't safeguards around it. And I'm not saying that government should come in and regulate the hell out of the industry, but it's a big concern of mine. When it comes to public safety, I want you to have a good night's sleep if you're going to
Which-
stick a knife in my neck.
Which did address the wage portion of that, and I believe, and correct me, one of you, 2 other guys, that we are now, or he is now, competitive with others in the area.
What does that mean?
It means he's a private company and he can set his rates.
I'm just curious what competitive in the area means. Does that mean
It's
that
not- I'll-
everyone's
I'll-
getting paid wicked low?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I know.
That's
Which is
right.
like my bigger concern, and it's not a
That's- I mean,
Northeast
it's-
specific
yeah,
thing. It's a bigger.
It's the industry, and,
Yeah.
and that's the way the industry is. And I will say, and to wrap this discussion up, I don't believe that right now, anyway, there's support on a municipally owned service on the Ambulance Review Committee from our conversation the other night. I don't think it's there. Certainly, if we go into a 1-year contract with them, if people want to explore that option, we can explore that option, but I don't think the support is there right now.
And I think if that 1-year is done with some sort of tripping mechanisms that might benefit us.
Well, that will be very helpful if we get nothing other than from this conversation, that your tendency is to go with a 1-year. If the consensus is that we're looking at a 1-year contract, that's I think that's extremely helpful.
I would say with the extension to the 2nd year, based on a review.
We'd have to build into the contract, probably at the 6-month period, we'd have to decide,
Right.
are we going to continue? That's only fair to them and to us.
No, understood. But
So,
I'd rather look at the 2-year thing than I would the 1.
yeah,
Yep.
Because you're just gonna be we're gonna be
Right.
kicking the same thing around next year this time.
yeah. Okay.
That's
I
helpful.
think
I'm in
we've-
favor of the one year with maybe a possible 2-year extension, but I'd prefer 1.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay. That's all we have on our meeting agenda. Said about an hour, we
You
did
did.
that. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting, and then we'll go into the workshop.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor?
who do we have to all do this?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, our meeting is adjourned. The workshop, I don't know whether, is it easier for us just to stay up here? I thought we might, okay.
Yeah.
We've been told from on high.
The voice
It
from
has some
above.
suggestions that in the workshop portion that we should sort of come down off our high stage or whatever and engage with everybody, but I guess this will work well enough. We have, and Ann and Heaven, please come on up to the table as members of the library committee. And we can grab another chair so Justin can come up too. So first, we'll have a report from the architects team, and some of us have seen some of this before, and there've been a few changes or whatever. It'll be up on the screen. You guys have a copy
Yeah.
over here
Yeah.
We'll start off.
as to where we are at this
Perfect, thank you.
point, so
Jeff,
turn it over to Steve, and you can introduce.
Will's gonna. So what you're looking up there on the screen is the latest site plan with Steve's latest building footprint. And that would be the main floor level that is overlaid onto the site. And a new design for the intersection, which takes Lime Rock and connects it directly to Central or Union Street. And Russell now has its own clean intersection. We've met with DOT to discuss that, and they like the idea of making that improvement. I have a call in to them regarding the MPI funds, which is their program for participating in the cost of that. So we're working on that. We've got parking, 15 parking spaces shown to the left of Lime Rock as you head kind of northeast up the street away from the library. One challenge that we have, and we talked about at our last workshop, is that Lime Rock Street is relatively steep. The grade there is anywhere from 10 to 12%, and as you go by the Scott property. So that makes it a challenge for us to have parking spaces that are 90 degrees to that grade change, because car doors are going to want to start to close back on you when you open them. But I think we found a way to grade that such that we can have the grade go up kind of diagonally across those spaces, and the actual slope as you go up and down that space or in the direction that a car door would open be 8% or less. So I'm pretty sure that we can do that. But everybody should know that you're not hearing anything.
Now it's better.
Okay. But everybody should know that it's steep, and we're trying to make it the best it can be. But there's minimal changes we can make there because there's houses all along there that have driveways and very little amount of space for us to make changes in. So that's probably one of the tightest site constraints, along with the stream that's to the south of the building. So we will have DEP permitting. We're pretty close to that stream, but you can see that parcel is very small, so we don't have a lot of options there. We're not any closer than what's currently there, so I think that will be fine, but it is a process we're going to have to go through. And that stream has some issues. In the past, that's been like blocked up, or there's stone walls to form a channel there. Some of that is caved in. There's roots that have grown into it. There's some undermining of an oak tree on the bank that tree probably should go. So I'm hoping that as part of this, when we apply for the permits for the library, that we can make some changes to that channel. The Youngs have had some flooding issues in their basement when the flow is heavy through there, and the rocks or ice or the roots are restricting it. And it doesn't take much for it to get clogged up because it's so narrow. So hopefully that'll be an improvement that'll be part of that project. Otherwise, it's relatively straightforward. All the utilities that are in Lime Rock are going to be able to remain where they are. There's sewer and water there. One thing I pointed out to the committee last time is I'm really hopeful that as part of this, we'll be able to cooperate with CMP. If you look sometime when you're in the area, there are wires going in every direction at that intersection. It doesn't make a lot of logical sense now. I think probably it's just happened over time that things have just added more wire. But there's an awful lot of overhead wires that go in some strange directions there. So we're hoping to have some communication with them. Those are the yellow lines that you can kind of see. There's a couple crossing Russell. There's a couple crossing Lime Rock. There's one that crosses by the front of the library to get to the Scotts, but yet there's a pole directly in front of the Scotts, and that pole has a line going to the library.
Do you guys have a good rapport with CMP, or can you ask for DOT to give you a little arm twisting help?
Yeah, I mean, CMP is relatively decent to work with. It's the cable companies, and when the cable companies have utility poles that we need to have moved, that's when it's a problem. So the lines and reworking the lines is usually pretty easy to plan with DOT, but if there's poles that need to be moved, that's where we seem to run into roadblocks.
And do you even know who owns the poles?
I haven't
that
checked
we-
to see who owns those
And that's where it
poles
becomes
yet.
complicated too. You got to figure out who even owns the
Yeah.
dang pole.
Yeah, so that can be complicated. But anyway, it was just something that as we started looking at this, you stand there and look at the wires and scratch your head and say, how did this happen?
Yeah.
But anyway, overall, it's very tight, but I think we've got it to a point where we're all pretty happy with the way it's fitting in there, and you can't have another square footage of footprint, though. It's maxed.
What, if I might, your parking spaces, you've got 15 of them. What does the state require, and what do you have for sizes?
For the parking space sizes,
More than 15.
well, we're showing 15 on Lime Rock.
Yeah.
Right.
The
that's
rest
what
of them are all spaces that are
I-
existing.
That's what I was talking about, the 15 that are there. Are they like
I think we're showing them as 9 by 18.
9 by 18?
Yep. And then we do have one additional handicap space that's just to the north of the building.
Yep,
Right
right
there
there.
between just below the hand there. That's it.
I mean, 9 by 18 is pretty snug. I mean, because not all vehicles are built the same, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start putting people, side by side, and not everybody's going to stay within the lines, I mean, I would as soon lose one space and have larger spaces for the other 14, but that's just me. I mean, I thought, my recollection was like 19 by 10 or something the state required. I don't know what.
Well, typically parking space, 10 by 20 is a generous space.
Yeah.
In fact, the town office in Rockport has the largest parking spaces of any place I know. So it is kind of nice to drive in there.
No, I mean, it's like downtown Camden. I can't take my, not
Right.
a full-size truck, but I can't park my truck within the
Yeah,
lines.
the town of Camden's ordinance has the smallest parking space
Right.
requirement of any that I know.
So that, I'm trying to find
Yeah.
that happy medium
9
so
by
that,
18 is
so you don't get crowded.
It's not bad. The good thing about that though is the street is wide there too. So as far as getting in and out, we have plenty of room. The 9 feet is probably I
Okay.
wouldn't go any less.
no, I wouldn't,
So, I mean, we could look at you can see we don't have much more space.
no, I
there.
wasn't saying go less, I'm just
And
saying,
And I'm hesitant to want to lose any parking spaces
Yeah.
because we're trying to squeeze as many out. We may have a little more room. We might be able to add 6 inches to each space, which can make a big difference.
And we had talked about demarcating certain spaces, depending on who's parking and what, and so that's all stuff that will be developed over
Yeah.
time and figuring that out.
Right, right. We did talk about having some spaces that may be marked for just
Drop off
or shorter periods of time.
Yeah.
For people just wanting to park, run in and get a book and leave. So that type of thing can happen. But your point is well taken.
Can I make a quick assessment that you want me to refrain from my questions until we get to the, I'm writing stuff down. I want to keep talking about this, but I want them to
If you want to
finish.
engage, it's, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
One of the things that I loved about reviewing the other architectural presentations prior to approving Steve was seeing the parking above that monument and it kind of loops. Yeah, a little, there you go.
Oh, across the park.
Across the park, and I know that is an unpopular idea, and I can empathize with that. You will retain some of that Lime Rock side. You'll retain those 19 feet of length of that edge of the park. But I think it was one of the other architects said one of the other great things is the grade is not such a big deal, and it's
Oh, it's not
basically a
the-
straight shot.
It
You
is.
wouldn't
The
be-
elevation as you go across there is almost the same from one side to the other, which means those parking spaces could be almost flat.
Did you spend any time? Yeah, please.
Yeah. So that idea is really problematic for me because that puts the parking as far away from the building as we could plan to put it. So, if it's raining, if it's snowy, if it's freezing, people have to walk almost the maximum distance across a park to get to the library. If they have a mobility issue, it's a long way away. And when we were doing this in the last iteration, we actually went out and walked the park and walked that area. And everybody who sort of walked it was like, yeah, this is a long way away to sort of put the parking and put a path through from that side all the way to the building.
Is it any further than the furthest parking spot up Lime Rock Street?
Probably
Is that-
not the farthest one up, but it's not farther than the first 7 or 8. Everything is going to be give and take. And this, to me, is more comfortable for the people that are going to come in the building than putting it farther away.
Okay.
I mean, I understand that gets us sort of better parking, but it puts better parking farther away. So what's better? And for me, having it more convenient to the building is more important for people that have maybe mobility issues or they're wrangling a lot of things or dealing with Maine weather.
and this is keeping Lime Rock two-way.
There's enough room for a two-way,
It's something you could change down the road, but right now we're laying it out to be two-way.
I was wondering what benefit it might be if you made it one-way. Would there then be something allowed on the other side of the parking spaces, or across from the 15?
If you made it one way, you
Good
might.
Driveways over there, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
not-
you've got
It would give
driveways
us a
over
little
there.
bit of a buffer from the creek or from the stream. We could maybe push the building a little bit out.
Well, no, the reason the building can't go any closer to Lime Rock Street is that we'd have to move the sewer line.
Yeah.
So, and that's just a cost we were hoping to avoid.
Yeah, no, I just didn't.
And we had the
See it on
discussion
that
in the committee about the one-way versus two-way, and the thought, I think, was if we make it two-way, we could always, 5 years down the road, decide, well, the traffic flow would be better if we made it one-way. If we make it narrow enough to make it one-way, we can't go back.
That's true. What's the? You get the red brick walkway from the park going across Lime Rock Street. What's the red brick part that goes with Lime
parallel-
Rock? Is that a
all-
traffic calming center?
Yeah,
divided?
all it is, and that may change. Again, these walkways and everything are
Schematic.
kind of a hybrid from a bunch of the different things that have happened so far. And we've sent this now over to the landscape architect that we're working with, which is Dewan and Associates. And so they're going to kind of fine tune some of the pathways and landscaping and some of the exterior design stuff. But we'll have something there. But the one you're asking about, Owen, is a divider for drop-offs. So to the left of that, as you're heading up Lime Rock Street, there's still enough room for two-way traffic. And then you've got that divider, and then there's enough room for one or multiple cars. You could probably get 3 cars there to pull up at the same time to drop off or pick up somebody.
Yeah, that's great.
And could somebody still get, if there was a car parked there, can they get by if there were 2 cars behind each other? Is there
There's
still
enough room for 3 cars.
And the cars can get by each other?
Well, not
Oh,
in that, not
no.
in that lane,
Oh.
no.
No, not in that lane.
Oh, okay.
No.
Unless it was a
They'll
mountain
learn.
curb.
Well, but what we're thinking is that's going to be flush.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that red is going to be like some
I
material
see,
that's
yeah.
different from pavement,
can
so that
drive
it's
over it.
visual, but you can still
Visually,
drive
gotcha.
over it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
So if
okay.
somebody's sitting there, yakking, and you need to leave, you can back up a little and go by them.
And one thing I want to jump in just before we go too much farther. Will already said this, but I really want to be explicit about this. These are the first drafts that we're showing to everybody.
Right.
Okay? Things can and will change.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that comment up when we get to Steve's portion. For those who are watching on live stream, watching at home, or watch it later, we are at the very preliminary stage. None of this stuff is etched in stone, is either as far as the site plan or when we get to the building. That thing may change, and some of that will be dictated by what Pete with Ledgewood tells us. Pete may come back and say, well, this looks like a great design. It's going to cost $3.5 million. And then we have to come back and say, well, we've got to make some changes so we can get within that budget. So please, to everybody paying attention to this, don't take any of this as final right now. It's a tremendous start,
Yeah,
in my
it's
opinion.
a really good draft for the amount of work.
But things may change as we go through the process. That's what the process is all about.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing on the site that is different than what's out there currently is is the parking spaces that we've shown kind of indented a little bit. And we've got some curbing there and a little bit of a change there to create a little more safe space. I mean, people park there now, but you feel like you're parking out in the road. And these will delineate a few spaces and provide a walkway directly to the library from those spaces on Union and Central.
And the whole island is helping the intersection and making coming to even the Opera House more, safer.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, getting rid of that island there is going to greatly improve safety.
That's
And
something we haven't really talked about, is that whole intersection will have a lot more green and a lot less pavement.
right.
And people
it'll be
will
safer.
drive slower because of that.
When I think about that intersection reorganization, am I thinking of that in the same terms that I thought about the previous bond proposal that failed? Meaning the cost of doing that is separate from the bond that we would go to ask for? Or is this the stream improvements, the intersection reorganization, and the parking, are all 3 of those rolled into the total bond cost?
When we voted the motion on the bond, it was construction cost, not including parking.
Right.
So parking will be separate. The road design, if the state participates in their part of it, they will pay a
give it-
significant
yep.
portion of it. And then we'll have, but I think the thought is that the change in the road will not be part of, that'll have to be funded some other way than the bond.
But the same thing as last time too. You can build the entire building on the existing footprint, not changing anything with the intersection, and we hope
Right.
and pray that we get the money and figure out the intersection over time. Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Will, but DOT, when we met with them, they seemed to be fairly optimistic about getting state approval for changing the intersection and also for hopefully getting some grant money. They told us that this was, I forget what the algorithm or the name is for the program, BMI or
MPI.
whatever it is, but they said that, they told us that this is a fairly small project for that particular program, and that might help us because typically when they're looking at that program, they're thinking like repaving so many miles of Old County Road or something like this. And this
Actually,
is
the Rocklands Old County Road project was an MPI fund project.
right,
And so that was a big number compared to this.
yeah.
The other thing, at the DOT meeting, they've asked Will to submit an application, and they will give us an answer prior to the bond issue.
Oh.
For not only the approval of, they will act on it in terms of approving it and also funding it. So prior to the vote, we should have that information in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And
The
that's
funding
binding
might not
for how
come
long?
for a
What's
while,
that?
but
How long does that approval stay good for?
Um,
Try to figure out how to come up with our share of the cost.
And it's also, they said it was an 80-20.
We like 80/20.
but only for the state
But
portion of the
only for the
road.
state portion.
Only for the state portion of that intersection. So we've got to define basically what's within that right of way. And so they'll cover the curbing, the paving.
6 spaces up.
Right. Yeah. So we've got to, that's what we're working on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Will, are you, you and I have talked about the parking extensively, and with the changes you've made in the slopes, you're more comfortable now with the parking at 8% is gonna be
Yeah,
okay?
we're right at, I mean, it's steep. You know, it'd be nice if we
It would
could,
be nice if it was flat.
if it was flatter, but if it was 10 or 11, 12%, I'd
Yeah.
be really uncomfortable with it. But I think we can make some changes there.
After our meeting, I went down that road, and it was like, oh yeah, there's
There's a little section there.
there's a
that-
section that's really steep.
Right, and you can imagine if you were parked
Yeah.
sideways to
Oh, yeah.
that, it wouldn't be
That's,
good.
that's not a parking space.
And that's the problem we have. But I'm pretty sure that we've got enough room there to make it so it'll be okay. Not great, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, it won't be like the town office parking lot, but.
No, I mean, you're still gonna be parking on a hill.
No.
That we're not gonna be able to change.
I remember one of the questions I asked the last time we looked at something like this was just if you're gonna go up on Lime Rock, if you pull out of your space and back up and you're at that steepest and it's wintertime and you try to pull up the hill, but there's not really much we can do about
There's
that.
very little we can do about the Lime Rock Street, mainly because you've got houses so close to it that they don't have that long driveways, so you really can't change the elevation of their entrance.
And if we start fiddling with elevation, we're fiddling right where there's a bunch of utilities too.
Right.
But Will did mention that plowing, the way you've configured it, is gonna be, the way you've lined it up, you're making it so that this area is easy to plow. And so, from a municipal standpoint, I think that we'll be able to clear the space, so then you won't run into the issue that you're gonna be spinning your wheels and sliding down, you know, having a YouTube video that cars are all down at the bottom.
Okay. Any questions for Will?
Maybe, and I don't know if we'll get this when we get to Steve's part. Expansion potential. Maybe we'll
That'll
cover
come
that.
in.
The building part. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Steve?
I think since December, Christmas, Ben and I and various people, Will and committee members have met at least once, if not twice a week. We've probably met 7 or 8 times. And our job, obviously, was to take a previous budget, which was $4 million, and a 9,400 square foot building, and reduce that by 25% to $3 million and around a 7,000 square foot building. So over this last month process, we've been massaging a plan and making various changes to it, going back and forth with Ben, and basically our concept has been, the site has as Will's mentioned, has a fairly steep slope to it. There's almost a 10-foot grade change from the upper part of the site to the street level. I think, what is it, it's 94, 96 elevation at the top of the site and 86 or 7 at the 86
At the sidewalk. Yep.
at the sidewalk. So we've got the advantage of that slope, and so what we conceptually said is we're gonna take the main level of the building, which is at the grade entrance opposite the parking spaces that Will's provided, and that will be the primary public use of all the spaces. We're combining all the public spaces on one floor. So conceptually, we're saying that's going to be the main operation of the library, but we have a lower level that's going to be more for staff, restrooms, mechanical spaces, and secondary uses that the general public is not going to have as much need to access, except with the exception, we have one major space down there, which is the program space in the event room that will be used many times after hours. It will have its own access and own entrance into it. So the plans that we've developed to date are conceptual in nature, as are the elevations. And we've just started working with Pete over a week ago, and he's starting to make a list of questions that we're trying now to give him enough information on materials and specifications to generally get a sense as to whether or not we're within our budget. And so the process over the next 6 weeks will be meeting again with library people. Ann's been at several or most of the meetings, and other people that have input on the design of the plans and the building are welcome to participate. So over the next 6 weeks, there's an ongoing process to develop the plans and develop the budget, and we think we're in good shape as far as that's concerned, and obviously Will is going to also be putting together some preliminary structural designs, and we have a mechanical engineer on board who's going to be giving us some general specifications for mechanical systems. And then we'll be coming back to the committees, and we're really going to be looking at two different cost issues regarding this project, and one will be the Cadillac in terms of whether it's a structural design or a mechanical system, or the less expensive systems in the building. And it's going to be a question as to what we want to move forward with in terms of the quality of this building, and that's going to be a big decision for all of us to make. I know Doug Cole says he'd rather develop less space and better quality than more space with less quality. So that's going to be a discussion that we'll have with the select board, the library committee, and the various people involved in this, and hopefully within that period of time, 6 weeks or so. That's about right, isn't it?
Yeah.
To get, by the end of February, to get that type of information, which will be important for making decisions moving forward. So this is really the beginning period of the conceptual design and the building elevations. And one of the materials that I think Ben and Doug Cole, I know, and I think Ann also, most people involved want to see a building that is a masonry building. We're looking at the cost of that in terms of long-term maintenance too, and we'll have numbers on that, the difference between dealing with a masonry product versus wood. So we're in that process, and we'll be spending a lot of time over this next month or so to get enough information to you for that.
Steve, I've got, Pete has already given us our marching orders and homework assignment, and given us dates of when those assignments are due. And so the first blush at him giving us our orders was that we had to have a conceptual design to him by Friday, the 16th of February. and that he would start working on the budget from February 19th to Wednesday, March 7th. Give him 2.5 weeks to deal with subcontractors. And then he would come back to our design team and review and tweak as necessary. The Thursday 3/8 to Monday 3/12, and that we would be trying to submit something to the town on the 13th of March. And so that was his proposal to us. I think he's still waiting for us to completely commit to that, and we were waiting for him to be hired. So we have to nail that down, but I wanted you to know that we have been talking amongst ourselves about how much we need to get done by when, in order for him to come back to us with something that we feel comfortable with. The problem we're going to have is if we're off by much. At that point, it's not going to give us much time for you to get to a bond referendum by the 1st of April. But we're giving it our best go here.
Hopefully, if he sees something that jumps out at him that says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You can't build this for that price."
We've already heard some of
Yeah,
that.
right, exactly. That he'll be able to kind of point that out earlier in the process rather than after March 7th or
Right.
whatever.
Well, and I think you mentioned before, Rick, when we were talking about the budget, our safety valve, if you can show that basement level,
Yep, I can.
Jeff? Well, basement, lower level. This is an area, and to answer Owen's question, the lighter area is, some of it's unfinished space and some of it is finishes that are much simpler in nature, like the staff area and the back files and break room. And then the yellow or the toned area is a more finished space, which is really the program in the reading room. So I think our safety valve is how we finish the lower level and how much we finish. And that will allow us to at least build a shell of the building that we need for general operation, but it will allow us future finish areas and when we have more money or we need to expand that lower area. So that's what we're looking at, and we're pouring a foundation and we've paid for that space anyway. It's a question of when we finish it and when we have the money to finish it all, so.
If I might, Steve, the combined square footage between the lower and upper level is,
The way it's been outlined right there, the finished space represents around 7,000 square feet,
the upper and lower level
upper and lower.
combined is 7,000.
And then there's about 3,000 feet
Well, that's what I
of
was
it.
asking, the combined total
Oh, the
square
total
foot.
would be 10.
Good, thank you.
So there's
Right.
your expansion
Yeah,
potential.
no, that's great.
There's 3,000 feet of
That's
expansion
what
area,
people were looking for, and I'm glad that we're,
right.
yep.
Would those unfinished areas be accessible to, say, friends of the?
Yes,
That's what the
yes.
thought was.
And
Yes.
they're gonna be able to have good, easy access,
Right.
ground floor
'Cause-
right in for storage?
Right, and I think that's a really good observation. The Friends would be excited to be able to utilize the space until such time as we need it to expand. The other part of this that the library committee was very excited about was that we had no idea that we would be able to get an allocated program room. And for libraries doing programming of all kinds, this is like, the cherry on the ice cream. And it was unexpected and very exciting. So we were very pleased.
I mean, I can tell you at our meeting this afternoon, we were absolutely thrilled to look at the floor plan and just see it kind of coming to life. It was just so exciting.
How many in that program reading room, number of seats you could get in there for a program?
Easily 50 seats in there, yeah.
It's a little smaller than this space, but
And depending on how, as the plan develops, depending on how many you want, we can hone that in, and there's nothing crucial about where the transition between the program reading room is and the back files. And we can, that's all part of the design development, that we can modify spaces per how the town wants them to be.
Yeah, And the other thing is that if we're short on our fundraising or budget, we see a space like that being targeted specifically for fundraising, where someone could donate the money to finish that space, and we could do that for other areas within the library too. And I think that would be an easy way to get over any shortfall that we might have.
Is there a reason that that wall between the program reading yellow part and the yellow part to the left is curved?
Yeah, that was really it was purely aesthetics to eliminate a long corridor. And it was also, when Ben was looking at certain displays, it would be a nice area where instead of walking down a corridor and having a 4 foot wide hallway, you could open it up and have display walls for various information in the library.
And a queuing area, so if, say you have, about 20 children coming down for a reading story time, and, the room isn't ready, they can kind of get all lined up and then go in. So it's a kind of a queuing area, and, it provides a lot of, and it provides extra seating for, there, we have shelves underneath the light well, and so, it could be, depending on if it's finished in the first round, it can be a nice little getaway reading area, nook, for, besides the main area. And so it provides options.
Makes it more interesting.
It does, yeah.
And whether that takes a final form of a curved wall, it may be just a jogged wall that still is orthogonal. That will come down to numbers, and so I understand from a construction standpoint, everyone gets scared whenever they see a curve. It is a non-load bearing wall, and so we would.
I was looking at the first floor going, what's curved on the first floor that makes it curved down
Pete,
there?
And
Pete's
we
going to
put-
take every curve and want to
Take
get
it
rid
out.
of it. We know that.
Well, I was saying to the guy before, I did construction work, and everything we did was round, and
Yeah.
man, those carpenters just hated seeing round stuff. But it's beautiful, it's gorgeous.
And we put for the marine room, we put if we're going to spend the money on a curved wall, put it in the best bang for our buck, put it in the main central area that everyone will get to be able to see it and get to use it. And so,
When I looked at this, Anne showed it to me a little while ago, and like my first thought was that marine room is gonna be beautiful with that bay window.
That was my thought as well. I thought that was the centerpiece of the library. It makes it somewhat iconic, and it becomes, the defining part of the library, even though it isn't terribly large as far as square footage goes. And I think
It's gonna be fabulous.
I think it really sets things off nicely. It makes it a much more interesting building.
Yeah.
Steve's first designs didn't have that in there, as I recall.
No.
and
It was square.
Yeah,
It was
but this
just a rectangular
adds
room
so
that's-
much to the
just
interest of the
looked
building. I agree with that.
Well, that's what happens when you're dealing with a construction manager.
And even on that front view, it just looks so nice.
Right, because you can anticipate people
and show the
staying out
elevation.
there.
And then
Might be
they,
part of that.
yeah, and it makes a nice exterior space.
Yeah, one of the
there you
nice
go.
things about that lot is its location, looking down on the village, and those terraced areas, I think, will be
Right.
very, very popular. I mean, that, for me, walking up those front steps to the library, that's, when you're there, it's like you can look down and see the whole village from a really nice space. And I think, having some chairs and tables out there, that will be a popular place to go.
do you want to do Lime Rock?
So on to the elevations,
Yeah.
the pretty pictures.
I don't want to sway anyone's decision-making, but I love bricks.
Well,
That's my own personal taste. I love brick.
My only worry is that it looks a little bit like another building in town.
Town office?
Well, they have added some nice detail to
Mm-hmm.
it, granite detail that makes it look a little less
Oh, yeah.
institutional.
Yeah. We're doing a cost analysis between the brick and wood, and there's no question that in 15, 20 years' time, the maintenance on a wood building exceeds the cost. Alan Mitchell was helpful and took the perimeter, and I think asked Smith and May to give us the difference in cost, and I think the number that he came up with is that the cost of a brick veneer would be about $100,000 difference than the wood veneer or wood finish, but all you have to do is figure several paint jobs over a 25-year period, and you've offset that cost. So, but those are numbers Pete will also generate for us.
Good. Any more questions from the board? Again, cautioning everybody that this is preliminary.
Do you want to go back to the other elevation? That's the Lime Rock Street side.
Is a question for you. When you go to take 2 or 3, or you're at your 7th or 8th meeting, when you go back and continue to refine this, what are you looking for from this board to help guide what you do for those refinements? Knowing full well that we are not professionals like you are, what type of sense do you want to get from us?
It's going to be the direction of costs. Will's going to present 2 probably different structural systems for the building, and Pete's going to present different mechanical system costs. And before we go to the bond issue, we have to know what caliber or quality of the building that we're presenting to the public at that time. A brick veneer is one of them. Obviously, we have to decide whether we're going to have a masonry exterior or wood, and whether we're going to have what type of a mechanical system, structural systems. Things like that are going to be important to know because it's going to affect the budget, and it depends on where you want to spend the money for the project. So those would be the big questions in terms of the overall cost of this building.
Who came up with putting the clock on the side? Because that's awesome.
And I like the optimistic
Clock.
date.
I like the clock.
The
like the clock,
optimistic
too.
date, 2018.
Far be it from me to be critical, but I think that's Russell Avenue, it's not Central Street.
Yeah, it
That
is.
is Russell.
It is.
But that's the view people will see when they're coming up
Yep.
Central Street.
Correct.
Well,
Slightly.
Well, it'll
Sort of.
Kinda see
corner,
that.
It'll be
corner, yeah.
Corner.
Ben, do you want to talk about shelf space?
Yeah, I can talk about all sort of the
Your-
interior
the
stuff.
Shelf heights and
Yeah,
does this
yeah,
give
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
everything that you're looking
Um,
for?
Well, first of all, I wanna just preface this with going into this project thinking that we were cutting out, a quarter of the budget. It was worrisome. I'm not so worried anymore. Everybody came at this not with how do we cut out a quarter, but how do we get 100% with less money. And that process has made the whole sort of working environment feel really good. We've really been trying to get the most out of the building for Rockport within these constraints, and it's been good. I am much more excited about this building than I ever thought I would be with $1 million being cut from the budget. We never thought we would get a programming room. I didn't think I would get a tutor study room at all. We had 2 in the last one, and I thought those would be the first to go. And so having all of those attributes in here really is exciting. I've workshopped the design with the staff. There's still a few little tweaks, but everybody's really excited about this from a programmatic standpoint. We look at this and we go, oh, we could do that there. We could do this here. And it's getting exciting to see how, when you breathe life into it, to see where people would be and what they'd be doing. To get to the shelf heights and stuff, we haven't crunched all the numbers, so I don't know exactly where everything is going. Everything fits, but we don't know exactly where, we're not sure, where the audiobooks quite go yet. So that's something the staff and I are going to get down to with the math and sort of sit down and have our own sort of workshop to do. So in the future, we'll be able to put labels on some of these areas. The shelf heights around the outside in the adult area are 6 feet, so the top one is 6 feet. But through all the central, the topmost shelf would be at 5 feet, and that's great. That's what we want. In the children's area, all the shelf heights are 4 feet, which is what you want. You don't want anything higher than that. There are some things in here that, do you want me to really get into it? Because I'll talk about this all day to you.
It was more a question of, do you feel that you've been given enough shelf space to put the collection that you want to have on there for the town on there?
Yeah.
And I guess the only other question that I had was, in the previous iteration, there was like an allowance for like
Growth.
ADA approval
Oh.
and then some for that growth to then shrink the aisle sizes to still be ADA compliant, but you can add more to the collection. Do we still have
Yeah.
that same flexibility?
We don't have. We're still, if I believe, a little over ADA in the aisle, but we don't have the built-in space to add an extra aisle because we've got the space underneath to go into. So we don't need that space up here because eventually in the future we've already got that expansion space built in, unfinished, so it doesn't have to cost with this whole thing. But so, yeah, I'm happy. And within the linear shelf feet, we've got room for growth of the collection. So, we're not going to move in and be full right away and already have to think about expanding into that space. Like, this should last for a while before we even have to start thinking about going downstairs.
And your people do a phenomenal job of curating your collection over time and circulating things in and out, so you feel like you've got enough space to offer people what they want. Great.
Oh yeah, and the seating's great. The way it's set up, we have access to some of the high traffic volume areas where we help people a lot. We've got more seating than we've ever had in good ways. We've got areas where we can actually close things off and do some programming. We will use that programming room downstairs more. But in really just good ways as far as flow and as far as letting people use the library and be comfortable in the space.
Can I ask a totally stupid, detailed question? That door that leads to the outside next to the marine room, can you see it from the circulation desk? And I guess I only ask it because I feel like there's a lot of doors in that,
Yeah,
in
and
that space.
those would all be locked.
Okay.
So these exterior doors are all like fire doors. They're there for safety. They will only be opened if we decide to open them for any reason. Like, say we're having some big thing on the patio and we want to allow more room. When you come in through the main entryway, and that's the main entry up there, that's where we want everybody to come in, so we see them at the circ desk, so we can say hello, greet them, have a little conversation typically. And they have to come in that way to get to the elevator or the stairs. So we'll be able to put eyes on anybody that comes in the building and then goes downstairs. And that's sort of an internal control thing that we were pretty adamant about. And yeah, it lets us sort of control that, but it's not like the building's not that porous.
To answer your question too, is we send these drawings to the state fire marshal's office, and all the spaces have to have two means of egress, and those doors are now just based on our interpretation of the egress requirements, but the fire marshal will look at it and say, well, you can eliminate that, or make another suggestion as to where we should have access. So that will go through development. But in any case, they will be controlled by the library staff as to whether or not they're used for general purposes or fire exits.
Does anybody in the audience want to ask a question or make a comment? Open it up to that if anybody would like to do that.
Do we have anything online?
No.
Okay.
No. There's 15 people watching, though.
They're interested.
Well, one of them's me, and one of them's Jeff. And one of them's Doug.
I can tell you.
If you'd like to make a comment, come on up so that they can hear you at home.
I'm assuming Doug hasn't fallen asleep.
I'm Jim Ostheimer from Rockport. Just a quick question. Are you planning to have solar on the roof as the town hall has?
That came up in the meeting the other day. We asked about it because if you notice in the elevations that they showed it with a metal standing seam roof, which would be the best way to accommodate that. Whether that's, I guess the answer to the question is maybe. I don't know how better to answer it at this
Where did
point,
you
but.
Justin, you said there was one roof, one
We-
section of the roof, one area of the roof. that
These
it was-
two sections of roof, when we initially did our first proposal, I had a solar engineer in Portland take a look at them, and he can plug in our longitude, latitude, the orientation of north, south, east, west. He said that for our latitude, we are at 93% and 90% efficiency on the, I guess, southwest and southeast gable roofs. But that is for New England and X number of days of sun we get throughout the year. So if you're going to put solar, these areas are a good prime roof. But I'm not a solar engineer, and if that's something that we'd be interested in doing, they would, of course, analyze it and go through.
And the way I understand the roof, it would be something that if we didn't do it right away, that we could opt to do it a couple of years later, and as we did with the town office.
I think if money was no object, we would say yes right away. The good thing about this is it sets us up for either philanthropic activity, someone purchasing it, or doing a very similar thing like we did with the town office, which is where we basically lease space out to an organization, and it still cuts our costs. We could, because this is a municipally owned building, we could do the same thing.
Yeah, if the legislature keeps the power purchase agreements in place and all those things stay in place, then that may be a way to do it and pay for it over time, rather than have it be part of the project.
But the big takeaway is we've done the roof to be the best roof to accommodate solar, and we've got good orientation on it when we get to that point.
Well, I'll add a caveat to that.
Yeah.
We don't know how much it costs yet.
Right.
So, and that's a caveat to all of this stuff, including the program room and all the thing that everybody likes, is that, you know, if this all comes back and Pete tells us this is going to cost $3.6 million, then we have to start looking around and figuring out ways to save a little bit of money so that we get within the
I
budget.
know, I was just gonna
Well-
say, you gotta leave the clock.
And you know, we have looked at cost. I mean, we haven't gotten it really close like what Pete will do, but I mean, we think we're okay, vaguely. I mean, we're not overshooting by too much, hopefully.
Well,
I
we'll
don't
see.
know. I mean, I don't know what I'm saying. I mean, we have talked about
I
the
think
cost and the
that's
square
the bottom
footage.
line right now is
and-
we don't know at this
and-
point.
That's somebody who wants this library.
But the good thing about the way it's laid out is that, I mean, let's just say for the example that we can't finish the program room for the $3 million, but we're building a space for it so that within hopefully a reasonably short period of time, somebody comes into the library and sees the space down there and says, gee, how come you're not using that space? And they say, well, we have to do some more fundraising, and then maybe that spurs somebody on to help with that.
Hopefully
So,
that person is a millionaire.
Do either Will or Steve, do you guys know, I mean, say the fundraising doesn't jump right up and get going, and how much leeway or space or contingency do you set aside for it to be a year or two down the road? I mean, you're not gonna nudge yourself right up to, 2.8 or 2.9 and then not have it be ready for 2 years later. I mean,
No, we,
Pete's coming up with that number, and he's gonna do it, I think, in 6
he
month
was going to try to
increments.
do
Okay.
it in 6 months. And again, I mean, like he said, he doesn't have a crystal ball.
he
And
touched on that, but I just
yeah,
wanna try to.
but we have talked about that, and he would basically just look at historical increases over the last, say 5 to 10 years, and try to see what percentage he should be adding. That's really all we can do.
okay. Any further questions for the panel? Wanted to touch briefly on fundraising. It came up here. I've met with a couple folks in the community, and I know Rick has, and I think Doug has as well. We do want to have the folks who are going to be involved with the fundraising be part of this process. We haven't yet identified folks who are going to help lead that. I know Doug had talked about perhaps, he called it a task force, getting it together. He sent me an email about that, and maybe getting a couple of select board members and a couple of other folks in town to try to identify a committee, and then there'll have to be some professionals that are brought on board to help with that as well. One of my concerns is that by the wording of the question, this will be private fundraising, and so I'm a little reticent about having the select board be too deeply ingrained in it. I'm happy to go out there and suggest that people get going on it and to form a committee, but I think once the committee is formed and up and running, it has to operate somewhat autonomously, and I've heard that from some of the people that I've talked to. There has to be some expectation of confidentiality when they're talking to potential donors, so that their information is kept as confidential as it needs to be. And so, for those who are watching online or who are watching at a later time, if you have an interest in becoming involved with fundraising for this project, if the project excites you, then we'd love to hear from you. But I don't know at this point where we need to go with this, as Rick may have some comments as well.
I had invited Bill Leone, who's in the audience, and Betsy Saltonstall, who texted me and said she's on the road, and she was likely not going to make it here until 8:30 or maybe later because of the weather. But, to me, there's a cart and a horse or chicken and egg question here is who starts the ball rolling? Who makes that that's the tough part, is once it gets going, then the select board can step back, it can and should step back and let the committee, the fundraising go on its own, but it's how does it get started? And I think Bill had some thoughts about how it gets started, and Betsy, I was hoping she could get here, but she's on the road.
Okay. Actually, before we dive into it, these guys may want to take off. I don't know, but
Yeah,
I do want to let me jump ahead to the timeline schedule issue that I put on the agenda, because you had talked about Pete had given you a schedule. The timeline that I had proposed, which we sort of adopted but didn't adopt, we never voted on it, had another workshop with the full select board on February 5th, and then what I had called a preliminary public concept plan presentation, for a more formal public meeting than we had tonight, with a lot of comment and feedback on February 26th. Do those dates make sense? Or I think I tried to write the dates down. You went through them pretty quickly.
Because I had the same thing. Have you?
Yeah,
Do
we
you
have-
have this? Okay.
I think your 26th is, Pete's gonna wanna,
Right.
think we
he's
gotta
gonna be He's
accelerate
gonna be
that.
right in the middle of
22nd.
acceleration.
The agenda says
well, the
26.
public,
22nd.
we ought to get the public comment
Says the
before
22nd.
Pete's deep into his.
Oh,
typing.
that's a
Yeah.
mistake then.
Well, I guess-
It should be the 26th.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's another chicken and the egg thing. I mean, how much public do we want to put out there until we have a price, or how far do we want to price before we have public comment? Which one should come first? I think,
And I guess I'd ask the question for this board too, how frequently, originally I sort of schedule a lot of meetings between the board and the team, and I don't know whether we need to do that or
I think
not.
we were
or-
just trying to get some placeholders so that
Yeah.
you
right.
could
Right.
come to us as soon as you needed to, and we would know what those dates were. And
I think the February 5th is probably not necessary.
That's what I was
we-
wondering.
We need to be working for the next really 3 to 4 weeks on technical details, stuff that's not very exciting. Figuring out, are we framing this with steel or wood, and what are the roof options, and Steve needs to be thinking about all the different finishes, and just so that he can give Pete an idea of what he should be carrying. And then Steve also needs to be coordinating with all the different consultants and looking at the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. So I think there's a lot of that technical stuff. What we were hoping, tonight is knowing that we're on the right track. Everybody's relatively pleased with the direction that we're taking it. We're going to finalize grading. We're going to be working with Dewan over the next couple of weeks to nail down those pathways and where walkways are going to want to be and what they're going to be made out of, so that Pete can price those. So there's a lot of that technical stuff that's next. And then I would say that I guess then the question is before we have Pete price it, we probably should meet with you again, which,
Okay. Can you, why don't you?
let me send you that.
Email me his schedule,
Yeah.
and then maybe you and I can,
Okay.
Yeah.
or I can talk with you and
Definitely.
Steve, and we can figure out a time. And we have a regular select board meeting on February 12th, I think, and I would guess that we probably wouldn't want to have that before then.
Right.
So we could decide at that meeting where we need to go with subsequent meetings.
Yeah, because Pete was hoping to start working, he wants us to hand stuff to him by the 16th. So sometime, the first of that next week, like the 19th or 20th, would be good to make sure that we show you everything that we're doing and that what he's working on 2 weeks following that
Okay.
is the right
All right.
stuff.
Yeah, so email me that schedule, and then we'll work
Sure.
something out. And I'll present it at the February 12th select board meeting, and we can talk about dates.
And kind of building on that, I'm trying to reconcile in my head, you obviously always want the public to be engaged. You want the public to give their opinion to you all, the folks that are working up the pretty pictures, so you can incorporate that in. If there's one thing we learned though from Reed and Company, is if you don't structure how that input gets to your ears properly, it's almost irrelevant information because it's contradictory, and it's what did he say, designing a house for a couple that's going through a divorce. And so I'm struggling with how do you involve and engage the public, which is overly necessary, with not confusing and muddying the waters from a good path forward that we seem to have on a timeline. So where's that appropriate time in here?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, but I do think at some point we need to have I mean, this is a workshop, it's a public meeting, obviously anybody could come, but I think we'll have to advertise one that's really soliciting people to come and give feedback, so that we hear from people whether
Yeah.
they really like it or what, just to get the general tenor of what the public
But
thinks
what we're
about
gonna
it.
need
I was gonna say
from you all is, have we allotted enough time between that public comment time and our voting time for you to make any adjustments and tweaks?
Right.
Well, if we have that meeting you have to get something to him so he starts working on the budget.
Right.
He can be working on the budget while we
Correct.
do that process, because then when he comes back with a budget, and then we'll have in hand what the public thinks about the concept plan that you presented to him, and that'll put us in a position, I would think, to then make the adjustments we need to make.
Right. But, this is happening fast, so we want people to
Right.
not think we've, skipped the public process, and we want to get feedback as soon as possible, and,
I think maybe I always say it's the last question, and it never is.
I've learned that.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Has anything that we've done in the past, namely the survey that we did and some of the listening tour stuff from Read and Read, has that helped guide what you have here? Are you taking things that you've heard previously from the public and incorporating those in?
Maybe you weren't here at one of the meetings. I think you might have been absent, but I mentioned how important all the Read information was originally. I mean, we studied his drawings and the relationships of the spaces, and then obviously with Ben having been heavily involved in that process, I think we've moved fairly quickly from Christmas till now, and it's because of the work that's been done. That money was not wasted, or time wasn't wasted. We're basically just taking a 9,400 square foot original design and shrinking it down. The relationships of the spaces and the organization is still very much intact with a lot of what Reed had done, especially the entrance and some of the spaces inside the entry area itself. So that was very beneficial, and we are where we are right now because of the work that's been done. So I wouldn't look at that at all from being wasteful in any way.
So if you, again, Will, if you can just email me that schedule, and
Yep.
then we'll put our heads together and come up with a schedule for what will work for February.
Yeah.
okay.
I think what you ought to try to do is cater to the public up front
Oh, absolutely.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And then we'll, and our office can keep dealing with Pete as far as the budget's concerned. But if there's information that we should know about, or any major changes that Ben and his staff wants to make, we should know that now, in the
And-
next couple weeks.
And Ben's been very good about filtering information that is coming into the library, saying that this is what people have been wanting, this is what we're thinking about, and we've incorporated all those comments into the design. And likewise, if you guys are hearing stuff on the street or getting emails, any and all information is very helpful.
I think a lot
Yeah.
of the skepticism is subsiding, I think, and that's in part due to everyone here getting the word out of what is going to be coming down the road. Or at least that's how I'm hearing
And I
things out,
assume
so.
you guys, Ben and you guys and our liaisons will continue to meet,
Oh, every Thursday.
you know, regularly.
Yep.
Okay.
And one thing on the public comment front, that starts now. I mean, we have now officially unveiled things. We're in the public sphere now. These are going up on websites tomorrow. We will start getting feedback. I mean, I will start having people come into my office and talking with the design. I'll start talking to the design with everybody. So, I mean, at least from the library perspective and the patrons that are coming in and the people that I interact with, I'm going to be soliciting that starting tomorrow afternoon.
And for the public's knowledge, you can find this information on the town website and library
Right
Well,
now,
not
it's
yet, but yes.
Very shortly,
It'll
they'll
show
be
up
able
there
to
soon.
find it
Yes.
at the library website.
Yeah.
And also through the
You can
town's,
put it on the town's website as
Yes,
well.
I think that's a good idea.
yeah, some way to make sure that there's easy access
Yeah.
to click and find this stuff.
Yeah.
You can live stream.
I'm going to put this up tomorrow. I'm going to put this up tomorrow afternoon on our website with all the carefully worded caveats about drafts.
Right.
I'm going to put it out on Facebook. I mean, I want to start. I'm excited about this. I mean, I think there's a lot to be excited about in this design, and I think we should start getting it out in front of people. So that's what I'm going to start doing now that we've got something that we've gone public with.
There's no telescopes to get people all fancy in their.
I've got my own. I'll bring it.
That's what that chimney up
Thank you,
there is
Will.
for.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, guys.
Justin, one quick question. I sent you an email earlier. Are those people at scale?
Roughly.
Yeah, what are those like? What are those like?
The cutout people.
This is schematic.
You got the ghost people on the side, and one
Oh,
of the
those
other.
ones are definitely, the ghost ones are definitely to scale.
Oh,
That
so
was,
the-
that was in AutoCAD. The color, everything is just kind of to make it look good.
Okay.
Okay,
But
so.
as as everything gets developed, it will be, everything will get refined.
Betsy gonna make it?
No, I'm thinking she's on the road trying
Okay.
to get home.
So back to our fundraising topic.
Bill, it's gonna be, I heard he was writing a check for the whole thing.
He's got it in his hand now.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Holding down the fort, Heather. Holding down the fort.
I'm always here for the long haul.
My thought on fundraising initially, and I've voiced this to a few folks, was to find co-chairs for the fundraising committee, where we could get perhaps a couple people who previously had been coming at the library issue from different places, and to help demonstrate that the town is coming together on this. And I've talked to a few people about that, and I haven't got anybody to sign on the dotted line yet necessarily. But we're having the conversation. People are generally supportive, although by some, I have to say, there is some reticence by some to get involved, whether it's, they're not fully engaged with this particular plan or whatever it might be. So, but as I say, the sooner we can get something going, the better off. I talked with one person about hiring professionals, which everybody I've talked to who has been involved with this, Bill included, says we need to have professionals to help with the fundraising. But some people have said the town should not be hiring them. The committee should be hiring them. And that's sort of the way the last fundraising process had started, with a couple of folks who had self-organized a committee and had started to do the work, and they had sent out resumes. They had actually done interviews for people, and they were well underway. And I'd love to see that process happen again. So far, it hasn't happened yet, but we're trying.
Well, as to hiring someone, I'm sure, and not to speak for anybody else, but I'm sure, my friends on the library committee wouldn't mind helping at least a little bit.
I know we talked to Ann about it, and Ann said, as happened the last time, that a group needs to get a proposal together to present to the library committee, and then the library committee can vote on it.
Doug Cole's comment is, that's fine, but I think it falls to the select board to get the process rolling. Who else is going to do it? It's just getting it started and getting the right people getting some people saying, we'll do this, and then step back and let them do their work.
Yeah.
But how does that happen?
Bill, you're all teed up and ready to go.
Okay. Well, after we had a conversation, I thought about this a little bit. And my thinking was that we should convene a library task force, or maybe it's called a library fundraising task force. It would be a group that would work together for a certain period of time. And the purpose of that would be to make the selection of a fundraiser and pull together the fundraising committee. And I'd suggest that gets done post-haste. I'd further suggest that the task force would include the town manager, select board members Cole, Gray, possibly you, Ken, Ben Blackman, Ann Philly, and Pat Messler. And I think these are the folks that I would consider to be the primary stakeholders. And then I would suggest that that Ken, you do this in Doug's absence, although Doug is coming back momentarily.
Not momentarily, he's,
I think he is, isn't he?
not
Next
momentarily,
week, I
no.
think.
I think he'll be back in
Yeah.
less than a week's time.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, their task, the task would be to identify a professional fundraiser, conduct interviews, make a selection, and that would be ratified by the board. The task force, with the help of the fundraiser, will identify and select co-chairs for the actual fundraising committee. Once the co-chairs are on board, they would play the major role in filling out the fundraising committee. The fundraiser should be able to provide, the professional fundraiser, should be able to provide guidance with these selections. In thinking about co-chairs, they should be well-known in the community, and they should have knowledge of possible donors. And the committee members should have some experience in making the ask, be able to ask somebody for a certain amount of money. The task force will then meet with the fundraising committee from time to time to monitor the progress and see if they're meeting their goals. And a budget should be set to accommodate robust promotion and research and determine where the pockets of wealth are in the town. And I would guess that there's going to be a budget of somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 to accomplish that. And I also think that the professional fundraiser really should do the research to determine what the capabilities are in the town of Rockport to raise the $1.5 million that you're looking for.
Yeah, some of the people that I've met with have talked about the feasibility study aspect
Yeah,
of it.
Exactly.
And
That's one of the most important things to do, because you heard what happened in Falmouth. They had a budget that they took them 2.5 years to meet.
right.
The capabilities of fundraising in our communities is not as easy as one might think. There's a lot of competition for money today, and which is on an ongoing basis every year. This is a little different because it's a one-time ask. I mean, if you go up to somebody and you say, I need $5,000 or $10,000 or $250,000, it's going to be one time. And you have a very tangible thing to show with this new plan, so it makes it a bit easier. But there's a lot of categories of fundraising. I mean, amounts, and when you start to look at it, it's a little daunting. You know, if you start to think to get to $1.5 million, you might need to have a major donor of $250,000 or maybe more. You might need to have one or more donors at 150. You may need 3 or 4 at 100. 4 or 5 at 50,000. You start to add these up, and you get to some of the smaller numbers, like 10 donors at 20,000, maybe 15 donors at 10,000. And to get the last 150 or $200,000, you may need 300 or 400 people in town to contribute, anywhere from, who knows, a piggy bank to, $300, 400, 500. But the major donors would be, I would say, anything over $5,000 and up.
Bill, if I might ask a question. With the task force idea, would it be, one of the things I was thinking is to have the task force basically tee up or start the process of it, just intake and trying to gather names, with two pieces, gather names to form a committee.
Right.
But also gathering names of, and start the process of searching for a professional fundraiser, but then utilize the committee to make that recommendation and decision, rather than the task force, to remove us, to remove the town, me, the board members from that. But somebody's got to start the process. But if we started the process and developed an RFP, started recruiting, looking at people, gathering that their information, and simultaneously that the fundraising committee was getting formulated, then could you turn that over to that committee to make the decision on the, or make a recommendation on the fundraiser?
Well, it depends on if you've got a couple of co-chairs that'll come on right away. But yeah, that would be good. But when I say you guys are the major stakeholders, there's no difference in hiring this fundraiser as it is to hire an architect or to hire an engineer, essentially. I mean, you just have to find the right person that's going to have a good fit in Rockport and a good fit with this task force that I think is a good idea. And then I think that you move forward. I don't think that you play a part after that. Of course, I would think that some of the folks that are involved in the Friends are going to play a part, and also, the library committee, of course, and Ben as well. But no, I mean, I understand why you want to have an arm's length from fundraising, and I think that makes sense.
That was one of the folks that I met with was pretty adamant that the committee ought to be doing the hiring of the professionals, and actually it was suggested to me that maybe more than one professional is needed, perhaps a consultant, to help develop a lot of the things you're talking about, and the organizing the structure of the thing, and then determining maybe the feasibility and things of that nature, and then somebody else who's somebody who's more of a day-to-day person, maybe a part-time person who actually sits in the office and fills out the forms and helps to goad people,
Right.
That's the wrong word, but
Yeah.
spur people on, encourage them. And that's what I'm struggling with a little bit is who does the hire, because if the task force does the hire of the professional or professionals that we use, and then the committee gets on and the committee doesn't get along with the professionals, then we're in trouble. And so I think there's some legitimacy to really having the committee on board to help with the hiring process. I think there's a lot of merit to that. I don't know. I'm not a professional fundraiser, so maybe I'm talking nonsense. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's my thought. And it was voiced to me by somebody else who I talked to, who like you has some experience in fundraising.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that it has to be a homogeneous group, and they have to all be working towards the same goal, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that once you can put those a chair or a co-chair in with the professional, then I think it'll be incumbent on them to fill out that committee
Yeah.
and find people that they can work with, want to work
I mean,
with.
I think identifying the chair or co-chair is job number one. That's my thought.
Yeah.
I really think we need to do that, and I've I've been talking to some people, and I haven't had anybody sign on the dotted line yet, but I'm hopeful that we'll have somebody. And maybe after they see what we've been presented with tonight, people will get excited about the project. Because obviously, like we heard the Falmouth story tonight, we've got to get going on raising that money. And certainly if we can get some people on board who are invested in that part of it over the next month or two, then they can be part of this process, and they can make input, say, you know what, I've talked to, people who I know who will donate large sums of money, and they aren't going to like the clock. They're going to want something different, or whatever it might
They are
be.
going to love
That clock.
Owen's support depends on the clock.
Yeah, that
my
clock.
contribution.
But you get the idea
going
that
exclusively
there may
to
be
the clock.
there may be something we can do in the design phase that will really somebody who has that knowledge will be able to tell us this will really appeal to donors, or this will turn donors off, whatever it might be.
I'm staying super quiet through this conversation because, similar to Ken, I'm just way outside of my area of expertise, if I even have an area of expertise. Some of the questions, though, that come to mind about the separate nature of the group, I'm still trying to reconcile that in my head. It makes sense that they would be separate from the town, but at the same time, how do you then assure folks that are contributing of any safeguards? Typically, when you deal with a municipality, we've got various pressure relief safety valves. Certain people hold the money here, and then it's verified by these people, and then it's verified by those people. So you always know that your money's safe.
Well, we have. I've talked to Rick already. One thing the town will have to do is set up a mechanism to receive the funds.
To receive the funds, and then I'm also curious
have
if
that.
we're projecting roughly $50,000 to $80,000 to hire professional staff and to hire folks to help, which again makes all the sense in the world. Where does that money come from? Do you take contributions you've already gotten to pay for those folks? Do we take money that we have? Do we take money from the library folks?
Again, the last time around, the group that was involved with the fundraising made a proposal to the library committee. The library committee was on board to help fund the professional help that they thought they would need. And Ann's comment to me this time, and Ann doesn't speak for the whole committee, as heaven knows, but she said, the library committee would receive a proposal like that and consider it this time around also.
I know for me, I'd be totally okay with helping foot the bill for professionals.
The amount last time was considerably less than has been quoted this time around.
And I've heard the number that Bill told us tonight, I've heard from other people too. So I'm from a couple of different people.
Yeah.
They're all coming in at about the same estimate as to what kind of investment we're going to have to make to.
What a professional is going to do is they're going to come in and they'll do they should do a review of the town and determine what the capabilities are. And that research will be very important. They'll look at the tax records, they'll see where the potential donors may be, they'll identify names, they may have already worked in the area and they may already have a good sense of who potential donors would be and what their capabilities are. So it gets to the point where you have a worksheet and then the committee has to make the calls and make the ask for whatever the amount of money is. And each time you make that call, you determine, what am I going to ask for? Sometimes you don't ask for enough, and the donor says, you know what? You asked for too little. I can give you another $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000. I mean, this does happen when you're doing that, and you say, gee, why didn't I know that? And sometimes you assume that you're going to get a big number, and you don't. So you really never know. But at least if you have, and this is where the professional comes in and can give you those kinds of worksheets that will identify where the calls should be made. And then, of course, the committee needs to participate in filling out those names.
I keep coming back to that survey we did. I'm hoping that survey is a helpful data point for a start.
Sure.
I'm going to squeeze every drop of useful knowledge we can get out of that survey. We spent some decent money on it.
Sure.
But we got a healthy amount of people responding to it. So any way to work some of those survey results into how we do this, I think, is a be a good use of our money.
And then a professional will work out some details with regard to matching funds, which can be very powerful when you're speaking with a potential donor.
Well, I don't know where to go with this tonight. I mean, I think that the task force may have some value, and like I say, I think job number one for me is identifying a chair or co-chairs, and getting them on board. I know I have a couple more meetings coming up over the next few days, and I think Rick does also. Maybe when Doug gets back, we can, I know Doug has talked to some folks, and so maybe we can pull that together and get you're leaving the country, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna be
That's-
away for.
That's not allowed.
Country's going to Florida.
Oops.
But, perhaps, with a few more meetings here and there, because I've been talking with people over the last couple of weeks, trying to plant some seeds and see where they go, and sometimes that's the way this process happens.
You're right, though.
sometimes.
This, to Ben's point, this is exciting.
Yeah.
And to some of the folks that may be on the cusp, to see some of the developments that we've had.
Yeah. I want to just clarify one point. I think you probably had Pat on that list because she was president of the Friends. She is no longer president of the Friends. That's Kathleen Meal now.
Oh, good.
Just to that happened recently, so she stepped back from that role. She's still on the Friends, but not in that leadership position. She's secretary now. Yep. And I just want to applaud you all. I mean, it sounds like what we just have to do is do the work. Find someone who's willing to do the work and help. And the fact that you're already doing the legwork to find those people to help makes me feel comfortable. I know it's still going to take a lot, but thank you.
Well, I'm hoping that we have some enthusiasm out there, and if anybody's watching on live stream or whatever that wants to be involved in this, and come to the town website and send me an email.
Come to the library. I'll talk to anybody.
So, okay. Well, thank you, Bill.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Bill.
And
When do you leave?
Saturday.
I thought it was today.
I think we're done.
Thank
We're in move shop mode, so we can
To
just
adjourn?
sort of adjourn, and
Second,
we're good.
All in favor?
roger that.
I have some letters here to sign. These are thank you notes, but not everybody's here.